to this, our continuing story of Chakmah Choter. Well, thank you for the kiss there, Wookie. I appreciate that. And for the paw. You're trying to tell me this show is one paw up? I would agree with you. We are continuing to study the life and times of Yahowah's Choter, whom Dode was the first to introduce 3,000 years ago, calling him Chakmah. And that means wise. And we find that 300 years thereafter, 2,700 years ago, the most prolific of the prophets, Yahowah, devoted the entire 11th chapter to the Choter as well, saying that he would be unique among all men and that he would be endowed with the 7 spirits of Yahowah. The first, of course, is Chakmah, reinforcing what Dode, his king, my king, our king, had previously written in the 14th Mashal. We're now listening to the original Sermon on the Mount. It's kind of a funny story here, and that Solomon, who was Dode's son, was the first to deliver a Sermon on the Mount. This is the commencement address for the house of Yahowah's name, for the first temple. And it is a profound presentation of all that he had to say about not only what he had accomplished, what had transpired, what his father had done, but also how there would be a Choter going forward. He called him a Nakri, an observant foreigner, that would enlighten God's people at the proper time. Well, the reason this is sort of funny is that Yahowah, by his own admission, is Dode's father, and Dode is Yahowah's son. And yet it is Dode's son who will deliver the first Sermon on the Mount, and it is his father, Dode, who will deliver the second, because what we read in now Matthew 5, 6, and 7, referred to as the Sermon on the Mount, was actually delivered by Dode to David. It was recorded by the Ibanim, was plagiarized by Matthew, but it is hugely supportive of the Torah and contradictory to every aspect of Christianity. And so we have the son delivering the first Sermon on the Mount, and 1,000 years later, his father contributing to it and having his sermon on the Mount. Only Yahowah, who is liberated in time, can make things play out in such a way. But it's an interesting insight in this regard. Solomon, however, was no Dode. There is only one Dode, and his son didn't measure up. And in this case, we just finished Devarim HaYomim, 2 Chronicles 6:21. And in it, we find Solomon telling God that it's something that he should choose to listen to and then forgive the people from heaven. And well, it's just inconsistent with what God does. We ought not tell God to listen to us. We ought to, of our own volition, listen to him. And there really is no forgiveness from God. He came up with a plan that was brilliant, that his son contributed to, whereby they took our guilt and carried it, Dode did, on his nefesh soul into Sheol, never to be seen again. This is explained in the 103rd Mizmor and the 22nd. Again, in the 88th, it is highlighted in the 89th. It is explained really throughout the first 30 Psalms. It's reinforced throughout the prophet Yahowah, particularly in the 53rd chapter. So Dode carried our guilt into Sheol, and when he did that, we are perfect before God. If you're perfect, there's no reason for forgiveness. You don't need it anymore. So Solomon had this wrong as well. Not only do we not tell God to listen to us, and we should instead listen to him. This is the whole idea of God never asking us to pray to him. Instead, he asks us to Shama. Even The most famous line, as it's repeated by Jews, is the Shema Yisrael. Yahweh is your God. Yahweh is one. They have managed to turn that into something to say, as opposed to following the instructions, which is Shema, listen, Yisrael. So Solomon may have been part of the impetus behind yabbering as opposed to listening. And so that no one is confused, Yahweh does not forgive. Those seeking entry into heaven by having their guilt removed need to approach God in the manner he has already articulated and now facilitated through his Son, by Dode having fulfilled matzah. So if a man errs, incurring guilt with his neighbor, he is deceptive with him, a curse is sworn regarding him. Then comes an oath to the presence of your altar in this house. So you listen from the heavens, and you act and you judge your servants to return and restore the guilty by offering a gift. This way is foremost so as to acquit the correct by giving this to the one who is right. That wasn't particularly well spoken, well thought through, and it certainly wasn't consistent with God's plan. You might say, well, we're reading something in the writings. This is Dabarim Ha-Yomim, 2 Chronicles 6:23. Therefore, it must be the word of God. No, that's not true. This was spoken by Solomon. These are the words of Solomon. All God is saying is, by bringing this to us, is that this is what Solomon said. It really isn't God's responsibility for copy editing our speech. If he did that, then there'd be no purpose in communicating through us. So if there's something God wants revealed that is prophetic, he's going to convey it in such a way that we articulate it in an accurate fashion. If God wants his people to know something through one of his witnesses, he's going to make certain that his witness understands what it is that he communicated, so that he passes it on to Yisrael and Yehudim in a manner that is accurate and actionable. But when it comes to a speech, it is something that a person can say, and all God's saying to you by having it appear in this text, which does contain prophecy and does meet the conditions of prophecy, therefore from God, is that it's accurately cited, but it doesn't mean that it's accurately spoken. You understand the difference between those two things? And I think that's important. So, if, for example, there's an episode where very early on, after the children of Yisrael are born to Jacob, that they scheme against a man and then against their brother. And their whole narrative is repulsive, what they conclude, how they go about their business. And you would never assume that what they're saying, which is really conniving and deceitful, is inspired by God to be recommended for us. You would just assume that what we're hearing is an accurate reflection of what they were thinking and saying. The same thing is true here. This is an accurate reflection of what Solomon said, not an accurate conveyance of God's plan. If a man incurs guilt, and there is no if, so M can be discarded here unless you want to render M as when a man errs and incurs guilt, because we all do. And this is with his neighbor. Doesn't have to be with his neighbor. It doesn't matter who it's with. As a matter of fact, when you're incurring guilt, the person to whom you have incurred that guilt is irrelevant to your situation. So that was augmentative and not accurate. And he is deceptive with him. Well, uh, being deceptive with anyone is a bad idea, particularly if you're doing something like Solomon was doing here and you're pretending to speak for God. You should not do that. But a curse is not sworn on an individual who is deceptive. It depends on what you are deceiving regarding. If you are deceiving your neighbor because you're shortchanging him on his change or on a bill or on the property line or something like that, you're not incurring a curse. You shouldn't do it. But God has no interest in everyday squabbles. If we're going to represent him, we should be honest. But we do not incur a curse because, well, I took a potato chip off of Leia's plate and stole another one from Rich and didn't tell either one of them about it. I can assure you that does not rise to the level of a curse, even though I might have been sneaky with both of them. So that's just wrong. Then comes an oath to the presence of your altar. No, we do not rectify our situation by offering God an oath. Our guilt, when it is relevant to our relationship with Yahweh, which should be primarily religious and political malfeasance, or doing something that is harmful to God's people, misleading them, is expunged when we capitalize upon Pesach and matzah, where on matzah, dough carried our guilt into Sheol to deposit it there. It's a benefit of the covenant. It's a benefit of capitalizing upon the purpose of matzah. And so it is carried away, but not based upon an oath that we made, but simply upon our acceptance of this gift. To the presence of your altar. No, the altar for the sacrifice really is Pesach, and Pesach is designed to offer an extension of life and not has nothing to do with resolving our guilt. And while I'm just looking here, there's a black rectangle over my right shoulder on my screen. I don't know if that is also being broadcast as part of this live stream, but we should definitely check it out. So then comes an oath to the presence of your altar in this house. No, it does not. The house has nothing to do with us cheating and being deceptive with a neighbor. If that were true, then no one would make the Shabuah harvest. No one would benefit from Pesach, Matzah, or Bikurim and Dod's fulfillment because the house was destroyed shortly thereafter. No one could make the Shabuah or Teruah harvest because the house no longer exists. So, sorry again, but Solomon was wrong and he was ad-libbing in this regard. And it says that you listen from the heavens and you act. No and no. God doesn't listen to most of what men and women have to say. It's a very rare occurrence where you're doing the work of Yahweh and instrumental to what he's trying to accomplish. And you've studied his word, you've listened to him, and you say, okay, this I don't think is covered in your word. If it is, I've missed it. And time is of the essence. I need an answer. What are we to do in this situation? And he'll respond. But that's after years of listening and asking in the context of doing something that Yahweh wants done. Otherwise, God says the prayers of the Torahless, those who do not know what he is offering and expecting in return, look like dung to him. And it's not God who engages. It's, in this case, for the removal of guilt, it's his son, Dod. Solomon's father, who acted and engaged. And you judge Shaphat, your servants. That he didn't get much of any of this right. God actually delegates judgment. He delegates judgment just as he delegates our reconciliation. He likes to work through people. We will judge based upon his standards, but it is something that God actually delegates. And he does not judge those who work with him. So your co-worker, if you're a co-worker of Yahweh, you have made it to a level where you're already part of God's family. You have benefited from Pesach, Matzah, and Bakodim. You're seen as perfect in God's eyes, and you're just not judged. So there is no judgment of God's co-workers. And while he will return and restore those who were previously guilty, he does not return and restore those who are guilty. So it is only once you've made the decision to capitalize on what Yahweh accomplished through Dode to fulfill Matzah in year 4000 Yah, 33 ZE, that we shed our guilt and therefore are restored to fellowship. And it is by not us offering a gift, but by the gift that was offered by Dode. Now, this way is foremost. No, the way that you've described isn't foremost. Doesn't actually exist that way at all. So as to acquit and correct. No, the way to acquit and correct is by the fulfillment of matzah. That's why it is so essential to us. It's why it is so counterproductive for Judaism to have a 7-day celebration of Pesach and to ignore matzah. It is entirely counterproductive and serves no benefit. It would cause the person to be immortal, but retaining their guilt, and therefore those who are immortal and retain their guilt would spend eternity in Sheol. So we are not acquitted or corrected sadak by giving this to the one who is right. We are vindicated by the one who was right about Yahweh and as a result chose to fulfill matzah by carrying our guilt into Sheol to deposit it there and never to be seen again. Now, in fairness to Solomon, even though he got all this wrong, it is incumbent upon us to capitalize on our superior position with God. We are, as a covenant family today, and I have been, in a vastly superior position than was Solomon. Now, we don't know, for example, if Solomon ever benefited from the spirit of Yahowah, and the Choter has the 7 spirits of Yahowah. At this time, there was a very limited array of text that Solomon could read to understand what I'm sharing with you, while we have all of it available to us. And so we're actually in a better position to figure this out. But beyond all that, it really wasn't necessary for Solomon to get this right. Jews weren't listening anyway. They wouldn't listen until their backs are against a wall as we go into this time of Jacob's troubles. So since Jews weren't listening, they didn't listen to God. They rebelled against and rejected God over and over again. Had Solomon gotten it right, it wouldn't have made any difference. It really isn't until now that the whole picture has to be understood and that we need to get this right. So I've clarified it for you. I've told you what is right and how you can become Sadak. And this is Sadak Sadiq with the same word with a slightly different ending being repeated. So this is to be acquitted as a result of being correct. And then tzedakah repeated immediately thereafter as a result of this Nathan gift. I've shared with you how you can avail yourself of it. And this is the time that it needs to be done. So that's one of the advantages that we have. I've got the opportunity, since I've come to understand Yahweh's way and his path and his presentation, his story from beginning to end. I'm now in a position to reveal it to you so you can capitalize upon it and we can grow together in his family. Now, it is true that Sadak was repeated 3 times, 3 different forms of the word, and being right is what matters. And if your people, Yisrael, are afflicted and defeated before the presence of an adversary because they have missed the way regarding you, he's speaking to God, and they return and acknowledge by confessing your name, and they furnish the proper justification for intervention, and they request compassion in approaching your presence in this house, then you yourself will listen from the heavens. You will ultimately pardon the offenses and wrongdoing associated with missing the way of your people, Yisrael, when you return them to the land that for the benefit of the relationship you gave to them and to their fathers. Dabarim ha-yomim, 2 Chronicles 6:25. Now, in this case, this was largely true. The people of Yisrael have been afflicted. They have been defeated. They have been thwarted for thousands of years in the presence of their adversary. And they have been in this horrible position because they have missed the way, particularly pursuant to Yahweh. Now, God is on record as saying, and this is Shub again, Shub for Shub or no Shub for you. That's what this says. If they return and acknowledge, confessing your name, if they return such that they are reacquainted with your name and they furnish the proper justification for intervention, that would be accepting Dod's fulfillment of Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim. They understand the conditions of the covenant and how the benefits of the covenant were delivered through Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim, which Dod fulfilled. This would be the proper justification for intervention, followed by a acknowledgement and a return to Yahweh's name. Then, if they also expect in this regard compassion, they're going to receive it. This is all true. And they will be able to approach this house, but not the one that Solomon built. It would be torn down, not the one that would be rebuilt after the Babylonians tore this one down, that the Romans tore down, but the one that Dod and his covenant family build at the end for Yahweh. And at that point, we will all be able to approach Yahweh's presence in his house. And that's a time where I think we're going to have a much more open dialogue with Yahweh. He's going to have conveyed his entire Torah, written it inside of us. We're going to understand his teaching. And while it still will be a better plan for us to do more listening than talking, unless we're talking to our fellow man after having listened to God. I mean, for example, I do a lot of talking, but that's my job. I spent 24 years listening, and now I'm spending a year and a half talking. That's a pretty good ratio, and that's the right order of things. That is exactly what Yahweh would recommend for all of us. And then he will, it says you will ultimately pardon. So speaking of God in third person, he, Yahweh, will ultimately pardon the offenses and wrongdoing associated with missing the way. shub for shub. You return to him, he will return to you. You furnish the proper justification for this happening, which is the recognition of what David did to fulfill Pesach, Matzah, and Bakodim in his second of 3 lives. And you can return to the land with all of those who are brought back to Israel to be the remnant of God's people. And that you will then possess it and own it forevermore, which is a promise fulfilled. So to be Nagoth plagued, by comparison, is to be religious. It is a viral pandemic and deadly. It mandates that the infected be isolated and quarantined. The only cure is to cleanse oneself of all contaminated material to avoid future contact with the disease, and then capitalize on either Dode's cure during Chag Matzah, or if you were part of that last remnant, Yada's cleansing during Yom Teruah. Now, keep in mind that while Dode didn't go bah and become a lamb on Passover, and he is not the one who gives us life, and he is not the one who made it technically possible for his soul to carry our guilt into Sheol, or for the Spirit to protect him while he was there, or for him to be released from Sheol once that mission had been accomplished, so that he could sign our adoption papers into God's covenant family. The same thing is true with the Bashar. The Adamah Parah does not become a bull or even a red heifer during the fulfillment of Teruah. It is a metaphor that describes what is happening, because the red heifer is considered productive and fruitful, and that the bull, it's the bull's blood that anoints the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant, and it is tied directly into Shabuah and Teruah. So these things are all word pictures to help us understand what is being accomplished. But even with the red heifer sacrifice, it's nothing but a gory mess without what God does with it, and the waters he releases underneath it, the oratory that Elia provides during it, the flames that are so searing and enlightening. As a result of this, all of it is being used and orchestrated by God. He's just working through individuals that he trusts to do their part in this regard. And so God's provided through these 2 individuals the means to resolve our relationship. Now, apart from what Dode accomplished by fulfilling Pesach, Matzah, and Bakodim, and Yada, by what he will provide during the Day of the Herald, there is no other intervention that needs to be understood, or that leads to forgiveness, if you will, leads to being cleansed so that we are ready to enter God's presence. And they are both take it or leave it affairs. You don't offer an additional sacrifice. You don't go up there and say, well, could you beat me a couple times too, so I feel like I'm included in this? If you are working with me, for example, now you're trying to disseminate this message and help us be more effective in reaching God's people, you aren't going to accomplish it in the Christian sense of picking up your cross and following me. First of all, there's no crosses, and one sacrifice is quite enough. The job really is to help disseminate the message, come to know it, and then share it. Listen and then talk. That's the thing that would make the biggest difference. Now, relative to the house of the name, it, as I have mentioned, cannot have been the source of forgiveness. The building that was erected during Solomon's reign, beginning in 968 BCE, with the cornerstone being set, finished 7 years thereafter when this Sermon on the Mount was delivered, was plundered in 926 BCE by Pharaoh Shoshlik. It was looted a century later by Israelite king the Jesawah. This Jehoash broke through a wall of the building to carry away many of the remaining implements and the treasures. Pretty scummy things to do that Jehoash did. And so that doesn't mean that God was protecting this house. It's not a source of salvation. It was a symbol. And it was one that was temporal. And it's one that's going to be replaced that will be eternal. Thereafter, when King Ahaz of Judah was threatened by Rezin of Damascus, he bribed King Tiglath-Pileser IV to defend him by offering copious amounts of silver and gold, which he also stole from the house of Yahowah. Even King Hezekiah plundered the house, prying off the gold from the doors and the doorsteps, all to bribe King Shenarab, also of Assyria. So while the Bereth Shem was restored under King Joash, with the funding derived from popular donations, it would not endure. The building was plundered by King Nebuchadnezzar II of Neo-Babylon. This occurring in 598 BCE. A decade later, Nebuchadnezzar, following a 30-month siege, besieged the walls of Jerusalem in 586 BCE. He and his men looted the city and he torched it over the next year, demolishing the building that had withstood the angst and greed of kings for 400 years. Similarly, God is not indulgent or particularly forgiving. His plan has always been to remove our guilt by having his son take it to Sheol, never to be seen again. Without evidence against us, well, we appear perfect, without need of forgiveness. Now, it's curious that Solomon would speak of Shub, and he said it as Shub him, so return them, El to ha Adamah. That Adamah is the same word that Yahweh uses to describe the Adamah Parah. It is a bloody red man of the earth. And so they were currently united and living in peace in Israel at the time this was issued. So returning had nothing to do with them, but did have a lot to do with those who would have the opportunity to benefit from the Adamah Parah. So narrowly defined, Adamah actually means ground, whereas the land of Israel is typically characterized by Eretz. Therefore, this may have intended to be prophetic, recognizing that his speech coincides with Teruah's approach to Kippurim and Sukkah. This actually occurred, this whole episode occurred on the first day of the seventh month, and therefore on Teruah, on the day of the herald, it's the day that the Adamah Parah will actually resolve these issues on behalf of Israel. And so there is a likelihood that Yahweh inspired him to use this word to draw our attention to this fact, because it is the Adamah Parah who will actually resolve the issue of Israel's collective and individual guilt as part of the people's return, Shub, home to Yahweh. And the reference is likely directed towards, of course, the red heifer, the Adamah, bloody red man of the earth. This is underscored by the realization that it is for the benefit of the relationship God has offered to them and to their fathers, which would be through the Torah. Now, as we press on, Solomon addresses the lack of rain and thus living water, something Yahweh will provide in overwhelming quantity for those who will have missed the way during Teruah in year 6000 Yah. And, we're dealing right now with what was predicted to be drought conditions in Israel as we move toward the time of the Messiah's return, where the floodgates will be opened again. And so we witnessed recently the terrible fires that Muslims set throughout Israel. And we're now enduring a very high temperature spike in Israel. The weather conditions of Israel are conforming to what Yahweh said was going to happen. So God is going to provide overwhelming quantities of water for those who will have missed the way, and doing so during Teruah, the day of the herald, in year 6000 Yah 2033. With the heavens being held back, and there is no rain, because they have missed the way to you. And then they plead for intervention toward this place, and they acknowledge, while expressing appreciation for your name, from their guilt attributable for missing the way, they will return because you will answer some while afflicting others. This is 2 Chronicles 6:26. So God is suggesting that there will be a deprivation of water. His answer will be to unleash the floodgates under the Temple Mount, and there will be copious amounts of water that have multiple purposes. One will be for God's people. They will be cleansing, and they will also be life-sustaining. And for those who have come to harm Israel, God's flames will first incinerate them, and then these floodwaters will wash them away as the earth behind all of this is turned back into the conditions found in the Garden of Eden. So there will be a deprivation of rain, and this is because Israel and Israelites continue to miss the way. As for pleading for intervention, they will certainly do that, but it is really when they acknowledge and show an appreciation for Yahweh's name. Acknowledging Yahweh's name, appreciating Yahweh's name, that they will return and their guilt will be expunged, because you will answer some and afflict others. And this is the time where it is going to be fairly black and white. You're either with Yahweh as a member of the 12 tribes of Israel, or you're against him. And if you're against him, that will be the end of your existence. If you are with him, you enter the millennial Shabat. So this is prophetic of Teruah in year 6000 Yah. Many will begin proclaiming Yahweh's name. This will be the first step in returning home. And those who seek a remedy for their guilt at that time will find intervention through the sacrifice of the red heifer on Teruah. This is Yahweh's answer for those who wish to return, to prepare the adulterous woman that is Yisrael for her betrothal to her king, Daud. I would not be surprised if there is an ongoing drought associated with the time of Jacob's troubles, one that is resolved by the torrent of water that Yahweh will unleash from beneath the Temple Mount in conjunction with the sacrifice of the Adamah Parah. But also, as the earth is returned to the conditions found in the Garden of Eden, there will be refreshing rains. It is also obvious that since Elia and Yada will be addressing large crowds standing on the Temple Mount above the Wailing Wall, that there will be a staggering number of Jews below them praying and pleading for intervention. And while many will be rejected for choosing to remain political or religious, the plea of the remaining remnant will be answered on this day. 627 reads, "Then you yourself will listen in the heavens, and you will purge them of the offensive sin and resulting guilt of your coworkers and your people, Yisrael, because you will teach and guide them towards the way which is beneficial, producing and pleasing, which they should walk in it, such that they should walk in it, and give rain upon your land, which you gave to your people as an inheritance. I think Dode's son, Solomon, gets most of this right. When the remnant of Israel is returned, many of those surviving the time of Jacob's troubles and already in Israel, the others brought in via that white chariot. Yahweh is going to listen and going to respond. He is very much in the business of engaging at this time. It's going to be very different as we enter that last 3.5 years, as the witnesses arrive on the Temple Mount with Eldaya and Yada. We're going to find that the supernatural becomes quite natural. This is an amazing time where the last remnant of God's people need to make their decision. And those who make the right choice will be purged of their religious and political guilt. Co-workers, not so much. If you're working with Yahweh, you've already benefited from pizza, matzah, and bakurim. And so the beauty of working with Yahweh is he sees you as perfect. It's no matter what we do that is less than desirable, God doesn't even know it. He is just so excited, so happy, so thrilled that someone is willing to dedicate themselves to him in this regard, that he sees all that we do that is productive and right and correct and vindicating as so wonderful that he celebrates the good. It's like being with the perfect spouse who celebrates the good in you and is never bothered by some of the irritating flaws that we all possess. So at this time, it is the people of Yisrael, this remnant of Yisrael, that Yahweh himself will teach and guide, because he's going to place his source of teaching and guidance inside of us, that being the Torah. And we're all going to know at that point the way which is beneficial and pleasing and productive. And the path to God at that point is going to be exceedingly clear. And so there is going to be copious amounts of water that roar down upon God's people as they accept their ultimate inheritance. Now, should this be addressing Yom Teruah's fulfillment, then Yahweh will be listening at that time, and he wasn't previously. On the eve of his return, and as a result of his co-workers, particularly the work being done by Elia and Yada, he will teach and guide his people, placing his Torah within the remnant of Yisrael. This is what is foretold in Yirmiyah 31. This is the benefit of the red heifer for that final remnant, and the rejuvenating waters that will emerge beneath his sacrifice to cleanse and restore life throughout the land. Thereupon, Yahweh will allocate his eternal inheritance to his people. So as we proceed, Solomon is becoming ever more prophetic in his pronouncements. The last two have been really spot on. For example, during the 7 years of Yisrael's troubles prior to the fulfillment of Teruah, Kippurim, and Sukkah in year 6000 Yah, the land and its people will be plagued. They'll be blighted and torched by all manner of swarming pests, human cockroaches, if you will, with the death cult of Islam oppressing the land and infecting the people with the sickness of the revolting religion, while progressives spread the mind virus of socialist politics, acting as their pimps. Yehudim will plead for intervention, for some sign of divine favor, but apart from those who catch the last flight out of town during the Teruah gleaning, and those who manage to catch a ride in the white chariot, this is the last opportunity. to remove physical trauma and mental anguish, as well as religious and political guilt. Now, since a replica of the Tabernacle of the Restoring Witness will be erected on the Temple Mount, it appearing on April 4th, 2030, the first of Abib, as the witnesses arrive, those struggling to survive the last 3.5 years of Yisrael's anguish will have the semblance of something to reach out to after thousands of years of seeing nothing up there but the Islamic scars. And those who return to Yah will find God more than ready to receive his remnant of his people, wrapping his arms around them, saving them from the ultimate plague and from a time that the earth will be nearly inhospitable. Boy, are we witnessing that today. I'm just so sad for what the progressive, the Marxist, socialist, communist, with this mind virus did to these two lovely Jews that worked in the Israeli embassy staff that were about to be engaged to be married, and taking their lives in cold blood while shouting, Palestine, free Palestine. You know, I've emphasized this, and I do want to emphasize it again. Palestine was conceived in 1968 for a singular purpose, and that is to perpetrate genocide against Jews, to exterminate Israel. It exists for that purpose only. There are no Palestinians. There's no land of Palestine. It is strictly a terrorist ploy to destroy Israel. And to say that it must be free is to be ignorant, irrational, and grossly immoral. I mean, not only is Islam submission, and Allah calls all Muslims his slaves, and it is a religion based on predestination where there is no choice, and Allah himself says that no Muslim has any choice in any matter but must obey him, the Prophet Muhammad, non-Prophet Muhammad, and whoever king is imposed over them, whatever ruler is imposed over them. So you cannot free a place that's under Muslim control. Muslims have been the perpetrators of genocide, apartheid, and colonialization for 1,700 years. In the first 100 years, Muslims killed, raped, and plundered, enslaved 200 million people, a third of the Earth's population, all the way from India all the way to Morocco. The fact of the matter is that progressive pimps of Islam are incredibly stupid. They're incredibly immoral. They're blaming the victims of genocide, claiming that the victims of genocide are perpetrating genocide, and then they kill more of the victims of genocide. It is a reprehensible time that we have entered. If you were a progressive, shame on you. If you were a socialist, then your head is in your posterior. You're grossly immoral and ignorant and irrational. And this hateful violence that you are promoting is inexcusable. And you're serving as pimps for a religion that is based on the opposite of what you claim you value. It is the great perpetrator of apartheid, of genocide, of colonialization, of mass murder, of terrorism, of abusing women and depriving them of all rights, of racial hatred. And this alliance between these two numbskulls of progressive and Muslims is a great threat. Now, to the survival of our planet, and particularly since an entire generation, perhaps two, have been so indoctrinated by progressive academic institutions that they can no longer think. They have no capacity to be moral anymore. We are really entering a horrible time, and Jews are badly afflicted with this, with between 20 and 30% of Jews hopelessly affected by progressive politics, which is a religious plague in almost every possible way. So I wanted to speak to that. I also want to share that, in my view, X um, is culpable. X is where the socialist organization that the perpetrator, the murderer, belonged. Uh, that same day, published a manifesto calling for uh, socialists and all their followers on X to rise up against Israel. The evening of the murder, the perpetrator himself, Elias Rodriguez, posted his manifesto of rage and hate and of apartheid and of genocide and anti-Semitism, racism against Jews on X. So X was where his organization spouted their hatred and lies against Israel, blaming the victims as if they were the perpetrators. And it is where the perpetrator himself posted, X is complicit. It is the most anti-Semitic cesspool on earth. And it's only getting worse. So indeed, famine will exist in the land, and plague and pestilence. Boy, are we seeing a lot of that. And also there will be blight and scorching heat, crop failures and fungal infections, locusts, caterpillars, and cockroaches. Surely their adversaries and enemies will oppress them in the land and at their gates. Every assault and pandemic, every sickening disease will prompt many pleas for intervention, even isolation. Everyone there will be requesting assistance and favors, such that this becomes pervasive among the people. And the entirety of your people, Yisrael, each man will be keenly aware of his personal afflictions and anguish, of his pain, physical traumas, and emotional suffering. And so he will stretch out his hands towards the family home. Now, what's interesting here is that last line isn't currently possible because there are these blights on top of the Temple Mount, the dome of Islamic subjugation and ignorance, and the mosque of Muslim death and persecution. But they are both going to be razed. They will be destroyed by Yahweh and replaced by his home, the tent of the restoring witness to the eternal testimony. So it will be back, and they will be able to stretch out their hands towards it. And these are the conditions that finally lead to a significant percentage of Yehudim in this remnant, Shub, returning to Yahweh. Things are going to get tough in every possible way. Israel's going to be completely isolated and have to produce all of its own food, and there will be some famine in the land. Plague and pestilence will also be manifest, and that is of many different kinds, from viral diseases and plagues of that nature, to crop failure plagues, to the plague of religion, particularly Islam. And there will be blight and scorching heat. We're experiencing some of that right now in Israel. And crop failures and fungal infections, locusts, caterpillars, and cockroaches. It's the time of Yaakov's trouble. It's just bad from every which way you look. Every assault and pandemic, every sickening disease will prompt many pleas for intervention and even isolation. They're going to hope that just everybody goes away and leaves them alone, but of course they won't. And it is having their backs up against the wall, having the IDF fail to protect them, having their politicians fail even worse in terms of protecting them, having the rabbis fail even worse than worse, trying to protect them. With everyone failing, there's only one place to turn. That will be to Yahweh. And so they will plead for intervention, and intervention will be forthcoming. Everyone will be requesting assistance and favors, such that this becomes pervasive among the people. It will be the first time ever. And so things have to get very bad for Israel before they get better. And for the entirety of your people, Israel, each man will be keenly aware of all the suffering, its personal afflictions, pain, traumas, and anguish. And so he will stretch out his hands towards the family home, which will be re-erected right there on top of the Temple Mount in glorious fashion, the tent of the restoring witness. Well, this time is nigh. It will begin in 5.5 years, conclude in 8.5. This is the time of roaches appearing in far greater number than ever before. They're being egged on by the fungal infection, which has become the mind virus of thoughtless progressive ideology. This is the time when the leftist Islamic alliance, the Red-Green Alliance, will plague the planet. An incredibly insane and totally hypocritical collaboration of opposites, now serving as the greatest threat to Jewish existence. Blood has already begun to flow. What follows, however, has not yet occurred, and will not until the first day of the 7th month, the very date that these events were transpiring during the first Sermon on the Mount. In the weeks before the 7th millennia, when the plight of humans outside the garden will be resolved. From his dwelling place in Shamayim, Yahweh will not only listen as Towrah is being fulfilled, he's going to act. And as a result, the entire surviving remnant of Israel, whose ways have finally become aligned with Yah's, will be pardoned as the result of the sacrifice of the Adamah Parah, this bloody red man of the earth who is productive, known as the red heifer. Then you yourself will hear it from the heavens in your dwelling place, and you will provide a pardon, giving to each individual according to all of his ways, whose inclinations and judgment you know. Indeed, you, only you, know the hearts and the minds of the children of humankind. You know, and God's going to need to know it, because he's sending out, well, there's 4 chariots. One that stays in Jerusalem, the red one, it represents this Adamah Parah, this bloody red man of the earth, and 3 that are dispatched around the world. They're filled with Ruach. And these Ruach, which are projections of Yahweh's nature, will instantly know whether the Yehudim everywhere in the world that have been dispersed, they're listed in the areas that God's going to go for them in the 17th chapter. I believe it's the 8th verse of Isaiah. And God's going to dispatch this black and a white chariot, and they're going to know instantly, every person with Jewish DNA, whether or not there is any hope for them, or whether or not they're still religious and political, conspiratorial, or militant. They're progressives or Haredim or ultra-Orthodox or whatever they may be. If they are suffering from those things, they're still clinging to their politics, they're still clinging to their religion, still clinging to their conspiracies, then that'll be just it. They will have their lives ended because they cannot come in and pollute the garden. They cannot bring that religious trash or political trash into the garden. So their lives at that moment will be exterminated. This is just now 10 days before they would be obliterated upon God's return. The second chariot that is dispatched, the white one, will then pick up all of those who have any hope of receiving the benefit of the Adamah Parah and being cleansed prior to Dod's arrival, that are prepared as the adulterous woman is cleaned for her betrothal to the king. And then a dappled chariot goes out to find the Goyim, who are not afflicted by religion, conspiracy, militancy, or politics who have the right attitude and aptitude to serve during the millennial Shabbat, and they will be spared and be able to enter that period as the work crew, if you will, for the next 1,000 years, which will be pretty good duty and wonderful considering the alternative. So it is by knowing the hearts and minds of humankind at that point, and particularly the children of Israel, but this is Beni Ha-Adam, this is all humans with a Nazama, that Yahweh through these 4 chariots will make fairly quick work of this whole thing. The white chariot is going to conduct all of its business over a 12-hour period, going out in the morning of Towrah, coming back before sunset on Towrah, so everybody is there for the impending orchestration of what is a glorious funeral for the Adam of Parah, with his ashes and Yahweh's flames and the smoke and the copious amounts of water cleansing God's people. That's a beautiful saying. It's me, the greatest show on earth. And obviously it'd be a judgment call. Only Yahweh is able to do it, which is why he's dispatching the black and white spiritual chariots to canvass the planet and to determine who is restored in these days before his arrival with Dode. And even those already gathered in Jerusalem, with the waters pouring off the Temple Mountain, the flames burnishing the sky, and the smoke rising to the heavens, some will dance and others will drown. Some will breathe and others will suffocate. But make no mistake, throughout this 4,000-year history of Yisrael, there has been no time in which the majority, much less everyone, came to respect and revere Yah. In fact, the best we've ever seen is to have a small percentage of Israel respect Yahweh's name and his son, benefit from the covenant and from the Moed Mikra. But once this remnant is delivered in Jerusalem, it'll be the first time during this homecoming and family reunion on Yom Kippurim, sunset in Jerusalem, October 2nd, 2033, 6:22 p.m., that as a result of the Nakri and the work done by Yada and Elia, well, it's all going to be wonderful. Everyone will know and respect Yahweh, which is exactly what Yirmiyah 31 concludes. This will be our last statement for this program, and I thank you for listening. We've conveyed a lot of information. It's even put my co-host here, Wookie, to sleep. I can always gauge how exciting I am as a orator by whether my dogs listen to me or find my voice so soothing they go off into dreamland. But right at the moment, both, one snoring at my feet, the other one underneath my hand right here is the Wookster. So therefore, they will come to respect and revere you, speaking to Yahweh, and they will walk in your ways all of the days that they live upon the presence of the earth that you gave to our fathers. Devarim ha-Yomem, 2 Chronicles 6:31. There is a happily ever after. We're entering a miserable 7-year period, and we're a year away from it, and it's going to continue to be bad in this year that leads up to it. So let's just call it what it is. We're looking at 8.5 years of anguish. The world is devolving. But in the end, everyone who survives will come to respect and revere Yahweh, his name and his son. We will all walk in his ways through the Moed Mikra. We will live, thrive, flourish on this earth for 1,000 years that you gave to Israel and their fathers, and then even better days follow. So thank you for listening. It's always a pleasure to be able to share such wonderful information and insights with you. I've studied Yahweh's words, listening to him now for 24 years, and have really become the repository of these books that you see behind me, the 35 I have written on behalf of Yahweh and his people. And God has asked me to share with you what I have learned. And it is an honor, a privilege, and a joy to do so. I am Craig Winn, the Chakmah Choter, and I thank you for listening.